All right. Hello, everyone, again. This is Friday, the 13th of December, 2024, and we just had Trino Summit complete the last 2 days, and lots of exciting things were happening. So we're doing a last contributor call for this 2024 before we all slip into the next year and continue rocking Trino for another year next year. I have a few guests with me already, so that's great. So let's see what everyone wants to talk about. Anyone wants to start any specific topics? Or should we start with a recap of Summit?
Let's do a recap. During that time period, I'll bring up my little demo to start asking some questions.
Okay, cool. So Trino Summit, as you know, I can go to the blog. We had a whole bunch of sessions, 2 days event. We had a really good lineup. We started with a keynote from Martin. He shared some really amazing facts about Trino in this last year, including that we had more commits than ever before per year and new features coming that are pretty interesting. One of them, I'm currently working on the documentation. That is, it will allow you to write user-defined functions in Python. And I actually have a little mini demo running. So I built the current 468 snapshot development build, and I'm running this in a Docker container, and you can run a function such as this. And you see here, this is a function. This is an inline user-defined function in a query. So we have the select query here that uses the double up UTF, and the WUTF is defined here in this with statement. We're defining it to use the name double up, integer, input value. It returns an integer. And now here's the interesting bit. Language Python. Up to now, we had SQL routines or SQL user-defined function, as we're going to be calling them going forward. So we have the SQL as well as the Python UDFs. You then have to declare the handler, so the method name within Python that is going to be called when this function is called on the SQL layer. And then between the dollar symbols here, you have Python, including the the requirements for indentation and that kind of stuff from Python, the language. This is Python running within the Java virtual machine of Trino. So it's not some external Python that needs to be installed. It's Python itself running in Trino via a library called Chicory, which uses the Python port for the WebAssembly runtime. So basically, the WebAssembly distributable of Python, the language, runs within a WebAssembly environment within the JVM within Trino. I know it's like wrappings around wrappings, but that allows us to basically access all the Python language features from the latest Python releases that are bundled with this. Python, the language, and the core library is obviously only the ones that make sense in the WASM and Trino context. And this is a very exciting feature that's coming as an experimental one, and we're looking forward to everyone telling us more about their usage or things that they want to see as a next step on this, and obviously also testing and maybe some examples to add to the documentation. So that's exciting. The Trino Gateway also had a great presentation. If you look here, back on the blog post, we had a panel discussion around AI with Trino that was very interesting to listen to. Jan talked and Sebastian talked about our Helm chart. There were some really great improvements. And then we had a talk about Trino Gateway and the latest and greatest features there. We just got Trino Gateway 13, and we had a whole bunch of other really interesting talks. One theme that I find is that a lot of these people have custom improvements and stuff on Trino and also want to contribute them. So hopefully it's going to be very exciting to see feature improvements and stuff on Trino Gateway, Trino itself, and the other projects within the Trino ecosystem, such as the Python client or the Helm charts that are pretty active. One highlight was the last talk of the Trino Summit as well, and that is George Fisher presented about the C# and ADO.NET client that is now in Trino. And we just merged a first PR for that, which is the initial code contribution. And we will be working towards NuGet packages becoming available for that and improving the client with the community of users and contributors going forward. You can find the details in the GitHub Trino-C# client repository. Stay tuned for more updates on here. We have big plans for this, and it should be pretty exciting to see how it evolves. The demo that George showed used Unity to run a query and do a 3D visualization, and the audience was pretty impressed by that. So it should be exciting to see where this all takes us in the Windows world. That was it for Trino Summit. This blog post here is on the Trino website, is the preview. We will do a blog post next week that includes all the slide decks, or all the ones I got anyway, plus all the video recordings on YouTube. And so you will be able to follow up and learn more about the individual presentations. So it's been really good. We had pretty big audience, so over 700 people live and over 1,600 registrations. So it's been a great success for the Trinium community and for our event sponsor Starburst, obviously, as well. So thank you so much for that. It's been really good. That was the Trino Summit recap I had. Anyone want to add anything? And I think Robert said that the AI panel was an interesting discussion, and I agree. It was very opinionated and enthusiastic from all the speakers. So it was great to listen to that and slash try to moderate between all the speakers. And George obviously did a really good presentation on the C# client. That's it from my recap from Trino Summit. If anyone has anything else to mention, let me know. I'm going to switch over to my editor. So I mentioned Trino Summit, C# client, and the Python UDFs. Python UDFs are in master at the moment, and we're working towards a release very soon. No promise if it's going to be today. Probably not. Probably sometime next week. And hopefully I'll manage to get the docs going so that you can also actually figure out how it works. Now, what other topics does anyone want to talk about? Robert, you had a PR you wanted to look at?
Yes, I've been trying to follow up with committers to try to get my PR, reviewed and merged. Yuya dropped a couple of comments, questions about a month ago. The issue was, or the question is whether, as I originally, yeah, there it is. I added that config and disabled the JSON predicate pushdown by default for safety purposes, because the expressions that I'm generating, specifically the JSON match function calls that Pinot supports, only work currently if the JSON index has been configured within Pinot. If it's not configured, or the JSON index is missing, then the query in Pinot will return an error. And so I was trying to prevent against those errors.
I think that's a reasonable way to set this up, also because we do similar things in other connectors where certain pushdowns and stuff are disabled by default for environment reasons like that. In most cases, it's better to have them enabled just because, well, you get performance benefits from it. But like if you have these kind of like usability problems, then it might make sense. Also,
yeah, but these type of usability problems, I've kind of gone back and forth on it. As I documented in that thread there, that those type of usability issues are typically like only like found in like initial development, but still like
yeah,
there's a non-zero risk that you know, someone upgrades and their queries begin failing, right?
Yeah. So
Because it's now doing JSON predicate pushdown where it wasn't doing that before, right? So
yeah.
I
Well,
wanted to get
if
some feedback on this and whether I should leave it because I don't see any other way of like
I think the configuration totally makes sense. I will chime in on the PR, but also contact Yuya and maybe Elon to see if we can get this moving forward.
yeah, I've recently had a chance to talk to Elon. He's still very busy, but hoping to find some time during the holiday break to take a look at the PR.
Okay, cool.
Thank you, Manfred, for your help.
Well, thank you for your work on this.
Yeah, this is something that we know that we need on our side, right? The performance without the JSON predicate pushdown is a big, you know, significant difference in performance.
I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure that the connector also goes via JDBC, right? So.
No, it doesn't.
Or actually, the Pinot. Yeah, it
It
doesn't.
actually supports two. It goes over HTTP.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
And gRPC.
Okay.
But we're only using the.
But it's
for
not
the HTTP.
like it's not heavily parallelized at this stage yet. So that's where the performance problems will come from as well. Cool.
The performance problem is that if you don't have the JSON predicate pushdown, Trino has to pull all the data out of Pinot and then process it within the nodes and completely like, yeah. And Trino doesn't have indexes, so
yeah, no, that makes sense.
It's unfortunate that at this point, but with this, support, once you add the JSON indexes to your tables, right, you'll get the performance benefits of Pinot's indexes or that Pinot JSON index.
Okay,
So,
that's cool.
and it's pretty good.
Awesome. Yeah, so I'll try to follow up on that with Elon, Julia, and other maintainers. And when I do that, I'll probably also ping in core dev. We'll see. Obviously, it's going to be a bit quiet over the holidays now, but some people will actually have more time to work on Trino rather than less. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. Cool. Anything else? Eric, did you want to show us your demo?
Yeah, I'd like to get you guys feedback. Do you mind if I take over the screen share?
Yeah, not at all.
Okay. Yeah. Can you see the screen now?
Yes, Jupyter
Okay.
upload testing.
Yeah. So the business problem that we're trying to solve is, right, a lot of the community seems to use Spark and data loading, right? But Trino and SQL offer a very valuable way to be able to load content into. So my use case here is, let me just run it. Just run this. Forget the thing. So we have a pandas data frame of about 100,000 rows, right? So what we want to do is we want to take that and load that in a Trino. If you use SQL, one row at a time, it's not even possible. I think 25 inserts is like 45 seconds. It's some crazy amount of time. So what I did here is I took the pandas data frame, and I basically I'll show you. So let's just run again. Let me do. Let me log into my system.
So this Jupyter notebook is connected to Trino or something?
It is. It's 100% connected to Trino, right? So I have a data frame, and I've actually just add another plus in here. Let's just do a df and just look at the data. Run it. Right. So it's just some examples of content. It's fairly random content, but it's 100,000 rows, right? So what I want to do is I want to take this data and I want to put it in the Trino. So what I did is I took it, the data frame, I chunked it up into about 1 megabyte SQL inserts with some guesstimates and values. So let's just run and see what the amount of time is. And then let's do the insert. So it's going to take that data frame, like I said, 100,000. I'm doing a whole bunch of weird gymnastics of trying to do large inserts into a memory table first to try and speed it up, and then take that out of the memory table and do a final dump back into Iceberg as an example, right? So we'll actually look at the time. So this is about 1 megabyte chunk. So this is taking about 2 seconds, 3 seconds, 3 seconds, 3 seconds, 1 second. In about 23 seconds total. But I would like to figure out what would be the next steps to try and get Trino performance itself into these kind of numbers on loading data in using SQL. Because it's not acceptable to try and do it row by row. You have to do a lot of very weird gymnastics. So I wrote a whole bunch of Python code to do this. I'm just curious of what would be the next steps to get this more in line and mainstream within Trino itself versus some customized libraries I had to write myself. Does that make sense?
Yeah. George, did you want to chime in?
No, I'm just fascinated because this is some of the stuff we're thinking about from an enterprise level in general. Like, we want to be able to seamlessly and performantly interact from Spark-like engines with data frame-like concepts and RDDs, and be able to feed that back and forth in Trino. So I'm just very interested. I don't quite understand, Eric, exactly what you have here. Do you have like a rough diagram? Let's summarize what we're saying.
Of course. Yeah, so let me just let me just open the other parts of the code. I made a little humorous thing called Brino. Sorry, it's an internal joke, right? So what I've done is info test points, SQL inserts. Yeah, so what I've tried to do is I've tried to take the data frame. The first thing I did was I took the first row. I used SQL Alchemy to create the table, right, of only the first row. Why? Because you could take a data frame, you can look up the types, and it does a very good mapping to Trino types and create. But then what I tried to do is thereafter, I tried to create the schemas as a temporary table, executes those, etc. And then here, I create the first table like I see, but then what I try to do is I try to go through all the columns and I try to add these up to about 1 megabyte chunks so that the SQL statements, I take a certain amount of rows out, I create it into a large SQL statement up to 1 megabyte, and then I send that to Trino. It's not quite a megabyte, but it's a little less than. That gives you the kind of performance that you're looking for, because Trino seems to work very well on large SQL statements, but very poorly on small ones. So what I'm trying to, and the reason for data frames.
So hang on. So what you're saying here, you're doing one insert into with values, and then it's just like really, really long.
It's really up to 1 megabyte size. Yep. And then I try and keep the SQL statements themselves less than 1 megabyte. So I'm trying to, the reason for the data frame too, and we kind of need to do this through SQL, not through something like an out of band loading, is because you want real-time feedback to the user on data errors. You can't be like, hey, let's fire and forget this. Let's send this into an ETL system and then wait for an email to come back. You need real-time feedback on the data problems coming back. You understand? That's why SQL offers a lot of value to do it. And do we open source this? But this shouldn't be something I have to do myself. It should be part of the community, and I'm trying to figure out what would be the next steps. Where would this live? Would it live pandas? Are we trying to, upload Parquet files? Like I said, our business requirement is real-time feedback on data errors. You can't do this out of band. It needs to be in line to the system, so people are loading data in themselves.
It feels to me like something that you want like a Python iceberg client, like write directly to the storage, but do validation in line as part of the client. It feels awkward typing this through SQL. And so if your goal, if the only reason you're doing that is for getting validation, it feels like there should be better ways to achieve that.
I mean, like the advantage obviously is if you do it through SQL and the Trino layer, you can do it for any system, right? Like, yes, it's nice to have that via Iceberg, but that's only part of the story, right? Like the story is much larger. It would be great to be able to do faster inserts into whatever catalog, right? Like obviously the Lakehouse ones are interesting because of the wider usage and Trino being very good for them. But even a bulk insert into, I don't know, Postgres or so would be interesting to support, in my opinion.
I want to add on here as well. This is, I really love this, and people do ask about this, and I think it's some kind of reverse spooling technique, which is what we really want. Is we want to be able to feed, like, people want to insert because it's a semantic that they really understand, but they also want to land data in Trino. And when they asked me how do I do that, they were like, well, I have to go and use this other system to create a bunch of resources. So I love what you're doing here, Eric, and I do think other Eric, I think it has to be bulk dropping Parquet or some kind of columnar format. I don't look to spooling yet, but like it must. I think something like this is very interesting.
Visualizer. And
So I have to. Sorry,
I want to say that we did want to do columnar, but the problem is it doesn't give you real-time feedback on data problems going in. It'll give you some out-of-band communications like emails and stuff going back. That's why we chose not to do columnar type formats and load a Parquet file and load it into a table. We want to do a SQL.
But what I'm saying is I would love to see you be able to get that validation. Same way we do bulk insert into SQL Server, where it does result in eventual validation. And it can be, it doesn't have to be asynchronous. It can be a synchronous operation. So you can get that feedback, but the actual transfer is columnar. But that's a big step.
Yeah, so two things I want to mention here. A, this is definitely a problem that many people have and we are aware of. And I know that at least Dane and Martin have ideas on like what to do in that sort of stuff. And there is wishes to make these kind of like improvements. One of the things we just recently did is we did these table procedures in the Iceberg connector that allow you to go add from file or add from table. So if you have a Parquet file, you can add into an Iceberg table, provided it's the right schema, blah, 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 right? That's a step in the right direction. There's also the Yuya has a storage connector that basically can access storage and query that, and you could use that to pull from storage into like to a query that runs over. But ultimately, I think you're right. We need to think about this more and provide more utility functions. And I'm sure like that's what Martin and Dane have definitely already discussed in the past. I'm hoping that's part of the SQL usability improvements that similar to what Martin mentioned that he wants to get going this year, the pivot stuff. I think these kind of like loading and transfer things are on that same realm, but I can't promise anything or like don't know where this sits on our overall like priorities and how it's going to happen. It'll definitely be interesting to see this implementation from you, even so that others could play with it, in my opinion.
Oh, I'm happy to. I'm just curious what the next step is. And keep in mind what George said is very true. In an enterprise environment, you can't use something like that, the storage connector, because you have a very complex, and you can't always reach out to any system that you just want to reach out to load it in. So if you're using SQL, you've already got an approved channel from whatever enterprise environment you want and is compatible with that kind of flow. if you're going to do, you know, select from a GitHub repo CSV file, you're not going to have that enterprise
Yeah.
connectivity to those systems, nor are you going to even open up those kind of systems for your users to load data in. They're going to have one approved channel that their departments have signed off on, and that is going to be the SQL only. So that's why I need to go on that SQL only. It's not because I don't want to, it's because I don't have much of a choice.
Yeah, no, I also think that that's what's gonna like ultimately be the approach we're taking. There'll probably be others as well, but I'm sure that we'll work towards that. It's a bit also related to the whole arrow discussion where the spooling protocol is designed to support different file formats already, and we'll probably end up doing something with that. And like the reverse spooling sort of like idea, George, like you mentioned, is kind of like along those realms as well. But I just don't know where this is going to lead. I think it's definitely worth a follow-up discussion in general.
Okay, so what I can do is I can make an issue. I can push the code.
Yeah, I think that'll be good. That'll be
and then-
a good first step.
Because remember, this is open source. We don't expect Dave and David and Daniel and Philip and everybody to do the work, right? We just kind of, but getting through these PRs that sometimes take years is.
No, we are also working towards improving that sort of bandwidth issue.
I would say.
Cool. Thank you. What else do we want to chat about?
So the two things that I wanted to talk a little about were the Python UDFs. Manfred, I think you covered some.
I can explain some more maybe. So just interrupt me when you have questions, but I'll try to explain. So basically there is two aspects to that. So we have a separate new library, the WebAssembly Python, which is basically a host for WebAssembly Python. So since the last, I don't know, couple of releases, basically, Python releases binaries for different processor architectures, right? But also for WebAssembly. So WebAssembly is basically sort of like a virtual runtime environment that allows anything that supports WebAssembly to run in a WebAssembly host. And the WebAssembly host is typically a browser, right? But there
and
is
you're saying the WASM support is built in, it's from the Python community itself. It's not a third party.
Yeah, it's the Python community itself ships binaries. Like if you go to the download site for Python, you can download the Python WASM whatever binary. We wrapped this for Trino. Well, our genius David did, but so this is now, so there's another open source library. I forgot, like it's called Chicory, but I don't know you can see it in the dependency tree, which then allows a WebAssembly to run in the Java virtual machine. So now what we can do is we can basically combine the Python WebAssembly binary with that Chicory intermediate layer and run basically that WebAssembly within the Trino JVM. Restrictions on that are obviously that, it's the WebAssembly Python. So it's like the latest and greatest release of whatever Python, so not some old thing. And it's Python the language plus Python the core libraries as they are available in WebAssembly and as they make sense, right? Like you're still running within that sandbox of your WASM runtime and the Java virtual machine. So there's no like pip install, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff obviously doesn't happen. It's just Python, the language and the core libraries. But nevertheless, that's like super powerful for scripting. If you look at the, actually, sorry, this is not it. If you look at
like the WebAssembly distribution of Python, are all libraries supported? Like if we were to want to say, hey, we ship some libraries by default with Trino, I assume ones that have native components would Does that work out of the box? Do you know?
No, like it's all within the WebAssembly binary from Python itself. So if you have another Python library that you wrote or whatever, that's not applicable, right? Like,
Oh,
it
so
can
so
you
you
hack it to potentially include it in a custom version of Trino? I don't know, maybe.
yeah, I mean not as an end user of Trino, but like if the Trino community itself says like, hey, we want X library, pandas, to be available in this. Like, does the Python version, sorry, does the WebAssembly version of Python like allow or support third-party libraries, or is it restricted to only?
I don't know.
Okay.
Like it's like it obviously like the whole loading and everything is different. I'm guessing at a minimum you would have to make a custom binary distribution of web of the Python WASM plus your library, and then
Yeah.
figure out the restrictions of that and pull it in. That's probably worth a follow-up discussion. So just for complete transparency, I'm totally planning to do a Trino community broadcast with David about this to dive into all those details. And because this is obviously very interesting, but it's also quite different from what people typically expect, right? Like people typically are like, oh, now Python support is in Trino. It's like this large thing of Python support. That's not the same as writing user-defined functions in Python, right? Like
Yeah, yeah.
so we need to make sure that people understand the distinction, but also can take advantage of the new features. To see my pull request for the documentation is hopefully going to get merged for 468 when the things ships as well. So sorry, it's a bit of a mess because there's a lot going on. But
And then currently, do you know the 30 is all going row by row, I assume? We're not doing any like batching or anything.
this is all within Trino, so there's no 30 stuff involved.
I mean, you still
Or
have to put it into Python types, right? So you're gonna have to do some 30.
so yeah. On the
I'm
translation
looking
layer,
at layout, I'm saying serialization, right?
yes. So there's a like the documentation here has I still have to add these details, but the type mapping here is documented between the types and that kind of stuff. So pretty much everything is supported apart from like some little restrictions on the timestamps and stuff like that. But like even more complex data types are supported. So like map and array and that kind of stuff. So it should be pretty transparent and workable. The PR that David has, for those of you interested to want to hack on this more, has the test Python functions class, which has a whole bunch of tests. So that gives you a bit more details, but obviously we want to like pull that all into the docs as well, and that's what I'm currently working on. But I think this is pretty interesting to play around with as well already. In terms of performance, this is obviously not lightning fast, but it is quite a lot faster than you would think it is. The usual problems apply the same as we have on our SQL-based user-defined functions, also known as SQL routines. If you have this on a query where you run the same routine a million times, that's not going to be that fast, obviously. Right? Like,
Right. Yeah, this is super cool though. Yeah, definitely interested in seeing kind of where we can go with this and how it gets used.
yeah.
So other thing I wanted to talk about a little was
Hang on, wait, before George, Eric, Monica, any questions on your end, just so that we can round this topic out?
I do have some. Sorry, I wasn't paying attention. What version of Python are you using inside of this? Is it?
I would be lying now. I think it's like one of the latest 3.3 somethings, but I'm
Is it,
happy.
is it Python now, or is
No,
it some Java based one?
No, it's Python as the WASM distribution. And then it's then wrapped in what's called Chicory to run within WebAssembly within the JVM.
Okay, so you know that there's a lot of hardware accelerated libraries inside of the C version of Python for dealing with data frames and math and all the other stuff. So
Yes, I don't know how that is done in the was import.
it's not going to work. So I have a lot of experience on this particular topic. What we found is by using these kind of versions, you're going to have a tug of war between garbage collectors because you have two garbage collected languages running on the same machines. And there's generally a tug of war between Java and Python. If you can go a little bit lower with the Pythons, it's a little bit easier, but then you have to deal with arm's length communications between the Trino and the Python. So it generally causes you a lot of cyclical issues going back and forth between the Python and the Java. Although it's powerful, it doesn't come for free. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. David has done a lot of work on this, so we'll have to see what works out. Like I'm sure this would be super interesting for discussion with David in a follow-up call, Trino community broadcast or whatever. And
Yep.
I'd happy have others as guests there as well. So I think this is definitely, like, keep in mind this is like experimental now. It's working and it's working quite well. Is it like optimized and everything? No, but that's sort of our next steps. And maybe that means we need to pivot to some abstractions. Obviously, with Java 23, we have the advantage that we can also get out to native pretty quickly now. So we'll see. Cool. Monica, all good?
Questions in the sense that just like, when do we see this kind of, when do you think the Trino community broadcast will happen is, I guess, my question.
Don't know. Whenever David is available in January, February, something.
Okay, Jan, Feb, and then it's getting, when is this getting released? Do we know?
It's gonna come out with the next release. It's merged.
Got it.
So 468, which will probably be next week, I'm guessing, at this stage. So exciting.
Awesome. I'll look into it. Thank you.
Cool. All right, Eric.
I have one quick question before we go on. Is this is the output of this captured? Like, could you use this for sort of logging or producing a linear, like a textual output in addition to the returning the table?
It's a user-defined function, which means it's a scalar function. So it returns a scalar answer to whatever the function does.
Yeah, but if you like put a print statement in there, that's kind of what you're asking about, right, George? Like, do you have a side channel here?
Like that, a side channel, sort of like producing like a meta log of what is happening in my query.
It's not. I don't know. I don't think you can get any output going anywhere, but also it's still a function. So it's not what's going on in your query. It's just like there's a function that you are calling, right?
Yes. No, I understand. I'm just seeing, yeah, it's very exciting. I will have to play with this because we have some interesting ideas for some of our other projects that we need to, this might be great. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no, any feedback and any kind of these kind of questions will be super useful for David also to look into. And like, obviously, we're eyeing out one issue at a time, basically, as they come.
Yeah, I'm curious also, George, you bringing that up makes me think, like, is the WebAssembly runtime sandboxed? You know, if I, as a user, it is sandboxed, it doesn't have, you know, network access, file access.
No, it's completely sandboxed within the JVM. We like, I'm still working with David to get the exact list. Like, we had to exclude a bunch of like libraries and stuff like that, like core libraries, and then Wasm itself, the distribution from Python, also excludes bunch. So we need to make that list for users so they know what they can and can't use specifically in that. But there'll also be like error messages that like hopefully explain a lot of that. So cool. Definitely exciting. So we'll see how that goes. Eric, you had another question.
Yeah, the other thing I wanted to talk about a little was the spooling support in the new client protocol. Seems pretty cool. It made me kind of immediately think, it's similar to what we do for query level retry for fault tolerant execution, right? Like to achieve that, the coordinator does basically spooling of the results to be able to resume in memory. I'm curious if there's been any like discussions about like if you have a query that's going to spool for the client protocol anyway, I think in theory you should be able to not have to store the results to do query level retries and like use what you've spooled. So just curious if there's been any kind of discussions around some synergies there between those two.
I don't know of any discussions. That would typically be Mateusz and Lukasz would be most involved there, but there's definitely synergies in the sense that both of those use the Trino file system support for S3 and all, like S3 and the other object store and like Google Cloud Storage and Azure. So it's the same like lower level support for interacting with the file system that's used. The like persistence of the files in the new protocol, in the spooling protocol, is using the Trino client protocol, which uses like the JSON and then compressed JSON via either C standard or Z standards or what's the other one? Anyway, like two other compressions. The spooling on fault tolerant execution, I think, does not use that same format, but honestly, I might be wrong.
Right,
No,
like it's using the internal storage representation.
I think so, which then means that they're separate, but that doesn't mean that can't be changed, right? Like, or couldn't be. It's definitely an interesting idea. What you have to keep in mind is the spooling for fault tolerant execution is kind of different in the sense that it's intermediate results that are completely useless to users, right?
No. I'm not talking about task level retry for FTE. I'm talking about query level retry. So that spools the output
like a
results.
full query. Yeah, okay. For a full query. Yeah, okay. I thought you meant, yeah, okay. Yeah, don't know. Interesting thought. Maybe worth bringing up with.
Yeah, you said Mateusz and Lukasz?
Mateusz and Mateusz, like Wendigo, Gajewski, and Lukasz Osipiuk is probably the one that knows the most about FD at this stage. Or is
okay, yeah, maybe I'll chat with them. Thanks.
Yeah, cool.
I gotta drop now, but thanks, Manfred.
Yeah, no, anytime.
And everyone else. Bye.
Cool. Anything else, or are we rolling? All right, that means we get back to writing on the UDF documentation and the Trino Summit recap so everyone else can see those videos.
I can't wait till you finish writing the documentation and I get to read all of it.
Yeah, you can look at it already. It's a painful PR, I can tell you that.
I do have one more thing. I just want to say hi, Monica.
Yeah.
Hello, how are ya?
Good, how are you?
Good,
All
it's
right.
always good to see you, Eric.
All right, cool. Well, let's go. Round this up. Goodbye to the Trino community for 2024, pretty much. There's no more public meetings at this stage, but obviously you'll see us on Slack. We'll be active everywhere, and there'll be at least one more release, maybe even two. Who knows? All right.
Awesome.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Manfred.
Goodbye.